Hello, I'm Dr. Ala Kamerdiner. Welcome back to Discrete Event Simulation. This is Part B of Lecture 14, where we talk about lower level modeling. We also will discuss in this Part B of Lecture 14 how to work with an element of the blocks panel, and also we'll introduce a logical or fake entity. So let me go ahead and briefly review what we did. So we considered a simple call center, and when we modeled the call center, we had one phone number for customers to call in with 26 trunk lines, one trunk line needed for each call. So we also had different types of calls, and we had three different types of calls: tech support, sales, and order status. And in Part A, we already modeled the arrivals of the calls and the tech support. So now we need to talk about sales and order status calls. So all of this we have done in Part A. And so for the sales calls, I would like to remind you that we don't have different type of calls. They're all the same. We have 4 sales staff. They're all the same. And we have one first in, first out queue feeding all sales staff. And the conversation time is triangular with parameters 4, 15, and 45. And after the conversation is done, the sales call leaves the system. And we'll also model order status calls that are again all the same. They handle automatically, and there's no limited number in process. And there is a conversation time, which is triangular, with time 2, 3, and 4. And after conversation, 15% of callers opt to talk to a person. And they're routed to sales staff, and conversation lasts an additional triangular 2, 3, 4 time. And sales calls have higher priority. So all of this we're gonna model in Arena. So we also modeled last time the system exit, and we had all calls of the all types finishing the same way. So we had the release module to release the unit of trunk line, and we had an assign module to decrement total work in process variable, and the record module to increment completed calls counter, and then we disposed of the call. So the next thing I want to do is I want to talk about the different types of calls that we didn't model yet, which are sales calls and the order status calls. So the sales calls, when we model them, we're gonna place an assign module, and that's where we change the entity type and picture. So again, we have already done that. We'll then add the process module, and it's going to be seize delayed release, and it will allow us to see the unit of sales resource. And the sales calls priority over order status calls will need to be modeled. So in the queue data module, we'll need to have this process sales call queue being shared. So we're going to change the queue and set the attribute value to lowest, and because we have the attributes, we're going to be changing the attributes in the process itself. The attribute value would be 2, so we need to have a smaller value. So we'll set it to 1 for the order status calls that will seek a person. And we also need to share the queue between the process sales call and this additional which is not going to be a process, because we're going to split it into a separate seize delayed release parts, but it's going to be another way to model it for the order status calls that need the salesperson. So we need to share the queue between those two different processing types. And then after that, all the sales calls will proceed to system logic. And so for the order status calls, we also will, we have already changed the entity type and picture, so we need to do that, but we have already done it. And so the next thing, we'll actually use a delay block, and that's from the blocks panel for this automatic listening, right? So listening to your order status. And because we introduced this delay block, in order to be able to animate it, we also have to include the store and store logic. If we did it, if we did it through the advanced panel, but with the delay block that is from the blocks panel, the store and store logic is actually already in that block's delay module, but we'll need to add them on our own. While when we used the store and the store from advanced panel before, we didn't have to do that. It already automatically created it. But in this delay block from the blocks panel, we'll actually need to do that manually. We'll also have a decide module for order status to figure out whether salesperson required or not. If no salesperson required, then we'll go to system exit. And if salesperson required, then we have the assign module to set the sales call priority attribute to 1, because we want it to be to have the lower priorities in the sales calls. And we have the seize module for a unit of sales resource, and we'll define a queue name process sales call queue, which is a shared queue. And so we'll also use a delay for conversation with a salesperson, and then release the unit of the sales resource. So as you can see, we actually going to be modeling seize, delay, and release here all separately, while in the process it would be all together, but in this case we can't use the process. We have to separate it in a separate modules, otherwise we can introduce a shared queue unless we introduce this separate seize module. So now let's go ahead and let me go ahead and show how to do that in Arena. So here I opened an Arena, and in Arena I reopened the model 5.1 from the book that we have created, a partial model that we have created in part A of lecture 14. And so we can now finish constructing this model. So you can see we already did the call arrivals and the tag calls, and now I'm gonna do the sales calls and the order status calls. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to the queue, and I will share the queue that I will create here for my sales calls. And I'm going to the basic process, and I'll have a basic process to model process sales call. So I'll grab the process and attach it to this module. So I'm going to click on this module so that it will automatically connect my process module that I will place after it to my assigned cells. So I'm going to go ahead and have this process, and then I can double click on it and add it in a dialog box. So I'm going to rename process 4 into process sales call. I'm going to change the action to the seize, delay, release, and now I can edit the resources here. So notice the priority is set to medium, which is 2. Now I'll add my sales resource, and one incoming call will be, or sales call will need only one sales resource person, so the quantity is 1 that the entity will seize. I'll change my delay time to minutes. And here in the process sales call, I'll select triangular distribution among the different delay types, and I change my distribution parameters to 4, 15, and 45. I will keep the allocation as is, and then I do OK. And what it will create is it will automatically create this process sales call queue that you will see now in the queue module. So before we had 4 queues there, they're all first in, first out. Now we have another queue called process sales call queue, and it's first in, first out because that's a default type. I will need to change this default type to the lowest attribute value. And then I'm gonna change this attribute. I'm gonna need to introduce a new attribute. And the name for my attribute, I'm gonna type in here. And what will happen is it will introduce a new attribute here. So it's gonna be sales call priority. And as you can see, now I have my attribute called sales call priority, and all the rest of the queues are not shared queues, but this will be a shared queue because there are some of the order status calls that will also need to be processed by salespeople. So this process sales call queue is going to be shared, and that's a queue to the sales resource. So let's go ahead and change the capacity of the sales resource. As you remember, there's 4 salespeople available, all the same. So we're going to change the capacity to 4. And we're going to go ahead and connect my process sales call to, so I'll click here to on my connect and connect the process sales call to the release trunk line. And so now you can see, so if I wanted to, I could maybe move it just a little more here, and so move the process sales call. So you can see how it goes and attaches to release trunk line. So now it attaches to its release trunk line. And the next thing to do is to take care of order status calls. So as you know, we already have changed the type of the entity in the picture for order status. So the next thing is to introduce a delay. And before we use delays, as you can see, we have a delay here. We had a delay there from the initial recording delay, right? And that's again, it says here advanced process. This is another delay from advanced process. This time we're gonna use the blocks panel. So if you don't have the blocks panel attached, you can click template attach and then select blocks.tpo and then press open. Here I already have it attached, so I'm going to use this blocks panel. I have the delay module found here. So as you can see, all different modules are listed in alphabetical order, and all of the modules, as you can see, are the flowchart modules in the blocks panel. So now I can grab my delay and I can attach it to this assign. So I'm going to select the assign, I'm going to grab the delay and attach it here. So this delay is actually different than some of the other modules that we worked with. So if you click on it, we can type in the label for the delay, and the label is going to be order status delay. And then we don't need the mark attribute in the next label, but we do need the duration. So we can either type in the duration here, or even better, you can left click here and then press the build expression, and then we can build the triangular distribution. We need to scroll to random distributions. So here's my random distributions, and then find the triangular. So I'm scrolling down to find the triangular, and I can change the parameters to 2, 3, and 4, and that creates an expression for me and places it in the duration box. And so the next thing I want to do is I want to introduce a storage ID. If I didn't put the storage ID, it would not create the delay, right, have a proper delay, and wouldn't collect the statistics on this delay. So it's very important, right, so that we place the storage ID here. As you noticed, right, when we had the delays before from advanced, we sometimes had it store and unstore to model, right? So if you had the store and store, it models the animation. And then in the store and store, it automatically creates the storage. Here, if you want the storage for our delay, we actually need to type it in ourselves, right? We could be selecting from this, but that wouldn't be correct. So instead, we're gonna type in order status delay storage. And allocation will be left as other, but there are other types of allocations that are allowed. But in this case, we have others allocation. And so the next thing to do is to decide whether the sales portion is required. So a decide module is needed, and it's found in the basic process panel. And also, as we created this delay in advanced process module, when we look at storage data module here, now we also need to have the storage for this, right? So automatically, right, it didn't create this order status delay storage. So I can go ahead and copy that and then click here and add the order status delay storage. And so now we have defined the storage, otherwise it wouldn't really work. So it's important that we go in and create the storage. But when we did the store and unstore, it automatically created the storage. So now, right, you need to remember when you work with the lower level panels is that some of these automatic functions are not there, so you need to make sure that you have created it, right? Otherwise, if I forgot to do that and then try to run the model, it would generate an error for me. So the next thing I want to do, as I said, is I want to go to basic process and place the decide module and attach it to my delay. So here is going to be my decide module, and I'll decide whether sales person is required. So if no sales person required, then we just go to exit. But in 15% we need a salesperson. So for 85%, we have no salesperson required. In that case, we'll just go straight to the release trunk line. In 15%, we need to see the salesperson. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the priority, because before I can seize my salesperson, I need to be able to make sure that it gets the correct priority. So to change the priority, I will use an assign module. So again, select this. Now it should connect my assign to this 15%, remaining 15%. So 85 goes here because they don't need a salesperson, and 15% needs a salesperson. So 15 is, of course, you know, the 100 minus 85. And so here I change my assign to set order priority status, and then double click or click add here to add an assignment. And what I want to do in this assignment is assign not a variable but an attribute. So now we have an attribute. We can assign an attribute. We should select an attribute name. So as you can see, we just defined sales call priority as an attribute. So I'm going to select sales call priority, and my value for sales call priority will be 1. So it will be lower, so they get a higher priority status. And then I say OK. And the next thing I want to do is I'm now ready to seize the salesperson. So I'm going to place, select this, and then after that place the seize module. And the seize module is located in the advanced process panel, and it's a flowchart module, so it's right here. So I'm grabbing my seize module, placing it right next after the set priority status assign, and then edit it in the dialog box. So I renamed this as order status call seizes salesperson. Keep allocation as other, and actually I'm gonna have the seize as other, and I'm gonna change the queue to process sales call queue. And so the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select the resource here, and I'm gonna change my resource to sales, and this is gonna be quantity 1. So now when the entity goes through the seize module, then it wants to seize one sales resource, request to seize one sales resource, and it waits in the process sales call queue for this resource. And the way it's placed in this queue is by attribute, because in the queue module in the basic process we selected by attribute. And so now we got this done. So the next thing is to have a delay. So remember, we have seize separately, then delay, then release. So delay is also in advanced process panel. So I'm going to grab the delay and place it right after the seize module, and then do a few changes with my delay module. So I'm going to rename this as delay for order status conversation with sales person, and I'll keep my allocation as other again, and I'm going to change my delay time and my delay units to minutes right away. So change my units to minutes, and now to introduce a delay, I can either type in TRIA for triangular with parameters 2, 3, 4, or even better, I could build an expression. So I left clicked, and after left clicking, this menu pops up, and I click build expression, and then in expression builder I scroll down to find random distributions, and then I scroll down there to find triangular, and then I select triangular and change this to 2, 3, and 4. And this creates the expression, which is placed for me in a delay time. Again, units are correct, so I'm okay. And the next thing to do is after the delay, the salesperson should be released so it's available for other entities or other calls. And so the release module is also in the advanced process panel. So we find the release module. That's a flowchart module. We attach it here. And then we rename it as order status call release salesperson. Releases salesperson. And I need to add the resources, so either I double click or I press the add here to add the resource, and the resource name is the sales because we just seized the sales here, we need to release it, and one salesperson was seized, so we're releasing one salesperson. So next thing we're gonna do is after that we're just gonna connect it to the exit, because after that it's exit for the entity. So I'm gonna press the connect button here and then click here and then connect it to release trunk line, because after that you're done, so you can go to this exit, and this is the system exit. So now we're almost done, except we need to make sure that we cut off the entity. So let me review how to do that. So as I mentioned, we're gonna have to choke off arrival stream at 6 p.m. right? So we close all of the arrivals and then we're still processing the rest of the entities. So in order to do that, I will need to create a single logical entity, right? So it's a fake entity we're creating, just a logical entity at time 6 p.m., which is in our simulation corresponds to the time 600 minutes. And again, right, it's overkill in making sure just one is created, but we can change the time between arrivals to very, very large and also have a maximum arrivals of 1, right? It would be enough to just do 1, but just to be sure, right, let's set the time between arrivals to very large as well, right? And that will ensure that only a single logical entity will be created. This will be the cutoff entity. And then in the assign module, we're gonna change the variable max calls that we used to allow the entities to come in into the system. We're gonna set it to 1. And this will actually stop the create module for creating any more attempted calls. So there we also can set the calls per arrival to 0, and that again will serve as a guarantee that we're not going to be creating any more incoming calls in the create module that we created in part A. And then the next thing, we're going to dispose of the single logical entity. So let me go ahead and show you how to do this in Arena. So now I'm back in Arena, and I'm going to go ahead and create this additional logic. So my logic is going to stop all of the arrivals here in this create module. So you can see we introduced 2 variables, calls per arrivals and maximum arrivals. And what I'm going to do is now I'm going to create a logical entity that will change these variables. So I'm going to have a create followed by assigned and then followed by dispose. And so this part here is going to be the logic that will change the variables in this module here. So let me go ahead and change or edit my second create module, and so I'm going to rename it as create arrival cutoff entity. And my entity type is going to be arrival cutoff. And that creates a new entity row in this entity data module, as you could verify. And then here, we're not going to have exponential. We're just going to have a constant time. And the time between arrivals is going to be very, very large to ensure that no more arrival cutoff entities are created. So we'll set it to this large number. And we change the units. And then we have only a single entity per arrival. And the maximum number is going to be 1. And the first creation is going to be at times 600. If I left it at 0, it would choke off the arrivals right away, immediately, and this model wouldn't be very useful, right? Because it wouldn't create any incoming calls right away. But we want to stop creating the incoming calls at 6 p.m., which in this model corresponds to 600 minutes. So I'm going to say OK here. This is finished. We finished editing this second create module that we have in our model. And then now I'm going to change the assign and dispose. So I'm going to change this to say cutoff incoming calls. And I'm going to add 2 assignments. As I said, I'm going to have my variable that corresponds to the maximum arrivals to be changed to 1. So remember, we had very large maximum arrivals, but initially we set it to the 999,999. Now we're changing it to 1 to ensure that no more new arrivals is created. And similarly, right, again, it's an overkill. We're also going to change the calls per arrival to 1. Not to 1, sorry, to 0, so no more calls can arrive. And so that ensures that no more arrivals happen in this module. So the next thing to do is just change this to dispose of arrival cutoff entity. And now we're almost done. The only other thing is left to do is to go to the model and change the setup parameters of the model. So let me review what we're going to do there. So in the run setup, we're going to change the replication parameters tab. And the others we're going to keep as always, as we typically set. So we need to make sure that the base time units are minutes. The replication length is going to be infinite, which is a default setting. And we're going to have the termination condition field where we're going to set up the following condition. So if you look at the total time now, right, because we choked off the arrivals, but that doesn't stop our system, right? It just stops the entities from arriving. We still need to finish running it until, right, we got all of the entities out of the system. So we could just say total work in process equals to 0, but that would only ensure that the total work in process is in 0 at that moment. It could possibly happen that before 6 p.m. there could be some slow times when no calls arrive and the total work in process is 0. So if we just kept the total work in process as 0, that wouldn't be sufficient condition because we could accidentally shut the simulation down before 6 p.m. So we need to make sure that it's not shut before the 6 p.m. and 6 p.m. is 600 minutes in the simulation. So we need to make sure that the current time, which is represented by the arena variable t now, that current time exceeds the 600 minutes. So both of these conditions have to be satisfied at the same time. If we only select this as our condition, right, or change the replication length to the 600 minutes, then it would cut it off, but we wouldn't finish serving the calls, which is not what we want to do. We want to be able to finish processing the calls that are already in the system by 6 p.m. So this is a condition that it must be after the 6 p.m. This is that we finish serving the calls currently. So now again, right, we could have done it in a different way, right? We could have looked at the number of trunk lines used, right? Or currently busy trunk lines instead of total work in process. So there's different ways to model it, right? Which would still accomplish the same result. So let me go ahead and show how to do that in Arena. So here I'm gonna go to my model, and I click on Run, then Setup, and then in the project parameters I can rename this as Model 5.1 Call Center. Change the name to Dr. Alan Hammersteiner. Place here my project description, and more importantly, gonna change my replication parameters tab. So I'm gonna keep the number of replications 1. I'm gonna keep the warm-up period as 0 as usual, and keep the replication length as given by default as infinite. Might change time units to minutes, and more importantly, base time units to minutes. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add the terminating condition. So I can either type it in here, but I might make a typo, so instead I'd rather build an expression. So to do that again, I left click, and here's my drop down menu, and I click on build expression, and then in here, first I want to find the current simulation time. So to do that, I'm gonna go to date and time functions. So I'm gonna click on date and time functions, choose current simulation time, and that gives me T now. And then it should be more or equal to 600 minutes. And I also want the other condition, which is the total work in process equal to 0. So the total work in process is my variable, so it's under the basic process. So we have basic process variable, and then current value, and then I select here total work in process, and I want it to be equal to 0. So now that I created this expression, it's gonna be copied into the terminating condition, and I say OK, and now I can run my model and see what happens. So let me go ahead and save it, and then run my model. So as you can see, right, we actually have different colored calls depending on what type of call it is. And in the order status queue, we have both blue and green balls, which means we have the order status calls and the sales calls. The sales calls were green, so you can see there's many more sales calls in that queue. So we can finish running it by fast forwarding it, and then look at the results of our simulation, which is also given in reports category overview. So it will by default open the category overview report, and there we can explore our model and look at the information regarding entities, and also user specified statistics such as the counter for attempted calls, completed calls, and rejected calls. So you can see 91 calls were rejected, and this is the number of the calls completed, which is 643. So we also have the information on the queues, and information on the resources, and also information on the entities, right? So you can see the arrival cutoff, entities, incoming calls, and the order status calls. And so we have the information on the time, and also information on number n, so we know how many incoming calls we had how many order status calls, sales calls, and tag calls we received, and also the number of completed order status calls, sales calls, and tag calls. So the next thing to do is we can finish this, right? The close the report, finish our simulation run. And do the animation. So this animation that we're gonna do is very similar to what we did in previous chapter 4 animation. So let us go ahead and first pull some of the cues out. I can also have the grid if I wanted to make it a little nicer here, so I can click on the things and attach it to the grid better. So now I can also extend these cues as I want them. And so I pulled all the cues from the model part, and I'm going to include it in the animation part. And then I will also add the storage to animate the storage, and that will be similar to the cues. Let me go ahead and come back for a second to the model window, and I'm gonna create a view. And so I'm gonna add a view with the hotkey M. So this is my model view, and I will later add the view for the animation when I'm finished creating the animation part. So again, here I have some of my cues. And the grid helps me space these more equally, and then I can add the storage, and it's similar to the queue. So here, this is where we had the queue animation, and that's an animate toolbar. So animate toolbar is this, and again, that's what we use for the variable animation, and for the queue animation, also animation of resources. And there is also animate transfer toolbar. So now I can attach it back, and that has the storages. So I'm gonna click on storage to animate for 3 storages. So I'm gonna choose my initial delay recording storage and say OK, and then have an initial recording delay. So maybe I can actually rotate it another way and maybe place it a little more here. And then after the initial recording delay, I also want, maybe I'll also extend it a little longer. I want to have another delay, so click on storage again, and I have a delay for order for tech code recording delay storage, and this is going to be somewhere here. This is going to be my technical call. Delay storage, and then the third one is oh, I don't want a queue. I don't want a queue. I want storage. So I have order status delay storage, and again I'm gonna place it somewhere here, maybe. And that's my order status delay storage. And so the next thing I want to do is also add a few variables and also some resources. So let me go ahead and click on resources, and I can get my tag1 resource and then change the picture here to the multiple resource. So let's go ahead and change it. So I'm gonna have several resources. So for tech1 I have several of them, so I'm gonna have two resources here, because for tech1 we have capacity 2, so I'm gonna have multiple resources for that. So I can have it as idle. And for busy, I could also change this. And copy. So here's my busy. And let me change that a little bit too, because I didn't align them as good or as well. So now I have a busy and an idle, and that's okay with my tech1. It's a tech2 resource, so the tech1 is going to be here. And if I wanted to make it larger, I can make it larger. I can also double click to add the C's area, and then have the C's areas there, and then double click on the C's area and also add additional points. So I'm gonna have 2 points for the C's area, and I can move the points around. So now I have 2 placeholders for capacity 2, and I'll do the similar things for the rest of my resources using this resource button and then editing it. So let me go ahead and do that. So now I did this for the tag 1, tag 2, and tag 3, and I'm gonna do the same for for sales. So I'm gonna choose the sales here as identifier, change right away my scale factor, select the C's area, and edit the idle. So I'm gonna replace this with well, let's change it back to this. Because the sales resource is the capacity 4. So I just need to adjust this other one. So now I have the 4 squares to represent the 4 capacity of 4 for the sales resource. So I'm good with it. I want to copy it. So I'm gonna select all of this and copy it, and then I'm gonna do the same for the busy. And now I have the idle and the busy. And I'm gonna place it here and maybe just move it a little bit. Change my C's area so I have 4, so I can double click. Well, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to double click on the C's area. So I'm grabbing the C's area and I'm gonna double click on it, and I'm gonna change to add more points. I have 4 places, so I need 4 placeholders for the C's area, so I have added 4 points. And now I'm gonna place them all in these squares. Now that I placed all of my C's points into the resource, I'm done with that. And the next thing I want to do is add some variables. So I'm gonna add variables for the resources and indicate the work in process tech calls and sales. So I have the so the first thing I want to do is I want to build the expression for the process product type 1 work in process. So it's under basic process variables, process, number in process, and this is product type 1 tech call dot work in process, or WIP. And so I'm going to place it here. And then I'm going to have similar things for other, so I can just copy it and then do some few changes. So again, here I already done this. Now I'm going to change this. I could just type in and change the type 1 to type 2. Or alternatively, I could have went in and again built the expression and then found the process number in process, and then selected here product type 2. And so I'll do the same here, show you again that I can go in, build the expression, find process, number in process, and select product type 3. And then here, what we actually have is need to make a few changes, because not only we have the people from the sales call process, but we also have the order status people as well, or calls as well. So now we're going to change this and build a different expression. So I will add the number of resource for sale, so we have current number busy, number of resources, right, and then choose sales. So current number busy, and that's under resource usage, and resources of course is basic process variables. So you go basic process variables, then resource usage, and then current number busy. And then we're gonna also add the number in queue for the queue, that's the process sales call queue. And this is our work in process number for the sales resource. And the next thing I want to do, and the final thing, is I want to do the plot. So I'm gonna introduce a plot here, and I'll show you that I'm gonna be adding the series, and the series is gonna be changed to the stair plot. So the line will be a stair plot, and it will indicate the current number busy for the trunk lines. So we need to change the expression here, so let's go ahead and build the expression. So click here, build expression, and then this is a number of trunk lines that are busy. So we're gonna go basic process and then resource, and in the resource is gonna be usage and current number busy, and here we select the trunk line, so it's gonna be NR trunk line as an expression. And so that expression is copied here after we finished. And of course, right, I could do some of the changes here. And what I want to do is I want to have the titles for x-axis, and there my x-axis is going to be time, and this is going to be importantly changed to the scale. We only have 60 minutes that we're gonna display, and the increments we can just keep at either at 10, or we can just do 60, it doesn't matter. And I could change the value for y-axis, and for y-axis I only have 26 trunk lines, so my increment is gonna be maximum, right? So this is my scale, the maximum of the scale is gonna be to 30, and if I wanted some major increments I could leave it as 10, or I can just have it as 30. And the next thing I want to do is I don't need to add the right value y-axis. I can add the title for my plot if I want it, or I can just do away with the legend, and I can change the footer as well if I wanted to. So we have the data series. We could do a few more changes. So I'm gonna change my time x-axis name and add to time. I also want to show that it's in minutes. And then for my left value y-axis, I'm gonna also change the text from the value and type it as the trunk lines busy. And then place the plot somewhere here. And I could stretch it out if I wanted to. Again, I could edit the plot additionally. And I could introduce a view, just like we had the model view. I could scroll it away from the model and introduce another view. So I could either go to view named views, or I can click on this to add another view by clicking add, then having A here for a hotkey, and then call it animation view. And so now I can switch back between my animation view and my model view by pressing A and M. And if I run my model, it can now just show it here. Of course, I could add additional pictures to make the animation a little nicer, but that shows what we're gonna have. You can see it's pretty busy all the time. So this completes this lecture. Please review the slides and look through this lecture again. This will be very helpful for your Lab 5B